Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I want to talk about the Star Wars film saga. All six, yes, all six films in the saga, including, let's just get it out of the way right away, the Star Wars prequel trilogy. I know this is a trilogy that not a lot of people really care for, and I'm kind of here to say with this video, not that you need my sort of approval in any way, shape, or form. It's to each their own in a bag of chips, But I'm here to say it's perfectly okay to dig the Star Wars prequels, whether that be for what they are, or you just happen to like them, whatever. Whatever the case may be, there's nothing wrong with liking them. You can like bad movies, and I don't even think they're that bad, quite frankly. But I'm somebody who, whenever I run into a situation where I don't like a particular movie, I try to give it a chance a couple of times. And sometimes, like in the instance of Blade Runner, this was a movie that for the longest time I could not get into worth a damn. I watched this movie time and time and time again. I must have watched it like 7 times before finally something clicked in my brain while I was watching it, and suddenly I was completely enamored with it. I had a complete 180-degree shift in my perspective on that film. I became a big-time fan of it all of a sudden. And with that particular film, the reasoning was because I was really getting into anime. I hadn't been watching anime for some time, and I was getting back into classics. I finally had caught up with Akira. I refamiliarized myself with the Ghost in the Shell film. I suddenly began to see Blade Runner as being almost shot for shot, the mechanics of the film, the drama of the story, the action and everything, the visuals, as being like a live-action anime film. And suddenly, everything about it, all of the choices, directorial, story-wise, cinematography-wise, everything clicked. Everything made sense. And I recently had an epiphany on the level of that with the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Ever since the Force Awakens trailer, which just, blew my mind, eyegasms, eargasms, everything like that, nostalgia out the wazoo, or out the Wookiee hole, whatever you want to call it, I had to pop in the original trilogy, the classic trilogy. Now, the only versions I have are the last DVD, releases where it's the sort of upgraded versions, but then you have a second disc that's the untouched theatrical versions. They're not as polished or anything like that, but at least they're watchable. And I elected to go with the polished, footage added, sort of the modern equivalent of the, 97 special editions, that kind of stuff. Jabba in A New Hope and all the new stuff in Cloud City, and when you get to Jedi, the musical number, all of that stuff. And unfortunately, young Anakin toward the end of the film, everything. But my sister joined me watching them, and she was excited to even go back to the prequels. She had seen them a couple of times, was never really drawn to Star Wars as much as I was. Much more, she enjoys like Doctor Who and Star Trek. And, but we watched these movies, and I really thoroughly began to enjoy the prequel trilogy more than I ever had before. Not since I first saw them had I enjoyed them this much. And it was kind of because in the last couple of years I had stumbled on an old VHS tape of some old, like silent home movies that were made by my grandparents before I was ever born, while my biological father, their son, was just a small child. And I was watching all of this stuff, and I was absolutely shocked to see my grandfather with a full head of hair, black hair, glasses that looked very different from what he would wear later in life, smoking, something he later had stopped, to see my grandmother younger, and all this stuff, the lives that were hinted at in this video. They went traveling around the world, to different states in the United States, and all this stuff. The cars they had, the houses they lived in, were all captured on film. And I found myself really being confronted with an entire, aspect of my grandparents' life that I never knew. And so I began to equate the classic Star Wars trilogy as being with, sort of in my mind, a similar equivalent to the grandparents I did know. that I would go visit every summer, or on occasion during the winter time, I would visit their farm, and they would throw me, summer birthday parties, because my birthday's naturally in winter, and it was always so awesome. I mean, they would almost bend over backwards to make me happy and make me content spending time with them, because I was somebody who, I really did not operate well as a small child, being far away from home for lengthy periods of time. And they knew that, and so they wanted to make me have the most fun I could possibly have. They would take me to, Walt Disney World in Florida when I moved down here from New Jersey and everything like that. And so, I mean, all of those aspects, just the excitement of, like, going on vacation with them and having a lot of fun with my grandparents, that was kind of like the classic Star Wars trilogy. Well, then we have the prequels come along, and nobody's happy with them. It's almost akin to stumbling across old VHS tapes of the history of your family that, you're seeing a side of them you've never encountered before. You would have never imagined. Maybe certain elements of those things you're really disappointed in finding out. Like young Obi-Wan. Why wasn't he the focus of the classic trilogy until the second movie, or I should say the prequel trilogy? Why did we have to follow around whiny Anakin? All of the awakening sort of story aspects and character aspects of Anakin Skywalker are kind of disappointing to a point. And the same goes for a lot of those characters. Amidala, we know that she is the mother of Luke and Leia and all this stuff. Spoiler warning, I guess. But the point is to say, I had a very, stark revelation that it's almost like looking back and seeing your family in a completely new and different light. And maybe you're not thrilled with the light you're now seeing them in. Realizing that this is something that came before you. Think of yourself now if you don't have children, especially if you don't have children. Think of yourself now, the decisions you make in life, the life you're leading. And think in terms of 30 years from now, when this life that you're living now would never in a million years occur to a grandchild that you have. And they might be shocked to find out certain things you think, your ideology, your political stance, your, things you're fascinated by, things you're entertained by. With that in mind, I began to see the prequels as almost being like that kind of awakening. Seeing a side of history in the Star Wars universe sense, of family members or relatives, relations at a distance that you never would have imagined, that you didn't envision in your own mind, is the way they were. It doesn't sync up with the way you thought they would be in the past, right? Or reflecting back. And with this in mind, I suddenly had a really sort of, big appreciation, newfound appreciation for the Star Wars prequels, because suddenly I began to realize, hey, this is like, it's still family, but it's an aspect of family I never would have pictured in my mind, but it's still there. It's still legit. It's still Star Wars. Maybe it's not what we wanted. Maybe it's not what we imagined. Maybe it's not what we perceived when we hear Obi-Wan in A New Hope describing being involved in the Clone Wars. Maybe it's not what we perceive being described as, like the history of Anakin Skywalker. But it's no less what's there. It's no less written in stone as part of the Star Wars saga, whether you like it or not. And you can still choose to ignore it. You can still, you weren't involved in it, so you don't have to. It's like looking back on your grandparents when they were younger. You weren't there. You don't have to acknowledge it necessarily. You can blot that out and just focus on the aspects that you really enjoyed or you really care to focus on. But it's no less part of that history now. And kind of looking at it like that, I began, like I say, to have just a newfound appreciation for younger Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, he is. Ewan McGregor was the best thing about, the prequel trilogy. When you get to Revenge of the Sith, I love how everything was lining up to meet up with A New Hope and everything like that. But what came before, in those first two movies, a lot of that left a lot to be desired for a lot of people. And again, if you kind of look at it like, the classic trilogy, these were my family. I grew up with them. Han Solo, Luke, Leia, Chewie, C-3PO, R2-D2, Lando. This is my extended family. Well, there was an era before you ever knew them. And that era is captured, for better or worse, in the prequel trilogy. And so I just wanted to put that out there for people who look at the prequel trilogy and are like, oh, I can't like that. I hate it. It sucks. There are people I know out there who have reservations and are afraid to say they dig the prequel trilogy for what they are. You do have some gung-ho Star Wars fans, younger generations who watch them all in a row, who didn't grow up the way we did, and I say that as the royal we or collective we. The people who grew up with the classic trilogy. I mean, I remember seeing Empire in the theater as a young boy. One of my first movie-going experiences ever was seeing that. And, Jedi as well. I was too young to actually see A New Hope in theaters, but seeing the classic trilogy first, a lot of us who have can't get into the changes George Lucas made, can't get into the prequel trilogy, but then there are those who like them and, usually will still bash them. And they're afraid to just come out and say, you know what, I unabashedly like them. I just dig them for what they are. And even if not for what they are, I just like them. Hell, Jar Jar's in there. Could we have done without Jar Jar? Probably. But he's there. And there's nothing you can do about that. It's an era gone by that you couldn't have influenced one way or the other. None of it is anything you could influence as a fan anyway. But I mean, looking at it from familial tie lines, emotional connectivity, that nostalgia, it's just an era that came before. And you may not like the way things worked out, but unfortunately that's just the way it is. And so yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, it's like I said at the beginning, to each their own in a bag of chips. You shouldn't feel in any way, shape, or form humiliated or reserved to admit things you like. I mean, when I was in middle school, I was a New Kids on the Block fan. I liked Backstreet Boys. I've since grown up and evolved, and I don't really, have taste for that stuff anymore. Still like the Spice Girls. What can I say? They're hot. But, I mean, I'm more hard rock and classic music kind of person now. I have much of an eclectic taste that, classical Beethoven, big band stuff, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, going all the way up into the doo-wop era, 50s, 60s, 70s hard rock, and things like AC/DC, Van Halen, Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, Metallica, Aerosmith, Sublime, one of my all-time favorite bands, Sneaker Pimps, Tiesto. There are just a bunch of different kinds of music I like. Why should I be ashamed to ever admit that I had taste in things that aren't necessarily the popular thing to say? I like both of the Mortal Kombat live-action films. Some people knock the first one, but you got a lot of people who are nostalgic like me, who saw them when they first came out, and, love that first one, but they'll still knock the second one, say how horrible it was, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Well, you know what? I like them both. Deal with it. Sue me. What are you going to do if I happen to like something and I just admit to it? I don't know why we get into this henpecked mentality where we got to say, especially when it, pertains to the Star Wars prequel trilogy, oh, well, the acting wasn't that good, but I still liked it. Could have done without Jar Jar, but I still liked it. The story and everything, it wasn't really that well written. It wasn't that conceived. The follow-through wasn't that great. It was kind of boring. All of these different excuses, but I still liked it for what it was and all this kind of stuff. Just like whatever you like. Don't be afraid. Don't, feel like you have to defend why you like something. And then there are other people, conversely, who, it's their first time catching up with movies in general. Classic movies that a lot of people have seen. And you might feel a level of embarrassment if you haven't seen the Star Wars movies or something, whether you have interest in it or not. If you don't, well, conform to your interests. Just find whatever you're interested in. But, give things a fair shake as well. I think we all shouldn't pass judgments like the Twilight movies. I've, gotten some jokes and jibes in about it, but I've never seen it, and I don't care to see it. I'm not going to say anything more about it. Why waste my time? And so, you shouldn't be embarrassed if you don't have interest in the Star Wars movies. Of course, you know, if you get into a framework where somebody really is ecstatic about them and can't be open-minded and understand that you haven't seen those movies or any other particular movies, and they're going to judge you for it, well, they're not worth knowing anyway. But the point is to say, again, especially with the Star Wars prequels, I have a newfound awakening appreciation for them based on this sort of just new way of, you know, perceiving them, which related to my own personal life and family, and seeing my family, you know, these family members I grew up with, and I never could have known in their younger days, seeing them and finding all of that out in a new light, you know. And that's kind of how I'm looking at the prequel trilogy nowadays. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not here to change minds, but I'm kind of here to, you know, hopefully evolve and grow your perspective in any case, give you something to think about. And maybe I've affected you, maybe I haven't. Let me know in the comments below if you can appreciate where I'm coming from. And if you do happen to like the prequel trilogy as well as the classic trilogy, if you like the entire saga like myself, if you only like one or the other, everything like that, and whether or not you're excited for The Force Awakens and whatever this new trilogy as well as spin-off movies, Rogue One, baby, so excited for that. You know, whether you're excited for all this new Star Wars content yet to unfold. So yeah, that'll be pretty much it for me on this rambling, long-winded, sort of descriptive video, trying to just prompt a new way of seeing movies, and not just, you know, contained to the Star Wars prequels, but movies in general. Like I said, Blade Runner was a movie I could not get into. Right now, there's a movie that I've watched several times, classic sci-fi, that I just can't get into. And every once in a while, I'm going to pop it in again to see if I can find that awakening so that I can have a new appreciation for it. That's the classic Dune. Just can't stand that movie. Quite frankly, I find it boring. But I know that if I can lock onto a certain perspective at some point, I might have a new appreciation for it. So yeah, otherwise I hope this video finds you well. That's enough of my yakking, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.